Hi there, Oli Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast about exploring the human condition, looking for the universal truths that apply to all of us because they're universal, and that if we accept them, can help us to live lives of growth and flow and wholeness and connection, all of the things that make us feel really alive. The opposite of all that stuff is what I like to call being unreal, which is where we become split and fragmented within ourselves, and we just end up being really kind of disconnected, holding back, hesitating, not knowing what we really want, and then just living what Ralph Waldo Emerson called a life of quiet desperation. The reason that people end up living these lives of quiet desperation is because they've taken themselves out of life, because of their social conditioning, the self-hypnosis that they put themselves through. And this podcast really is just about breaking away from all that stuff so that you can live a life that feels real, where you're doing things that you actually care about, aligned with your true values and your true intentions, and you feel good. Traditionally, this podcast has been an interview series. I'm still going to keep interviewing people, but this is the first episode that is going to be one of many solo episodes where we break down the nitty-gritty, the building blocks of this underlying philosophy of realness that keeps popping up. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll have heard a lot of these concepts, but we haven't really actually just explored them as individual concepts that we can turn into something we can actually experience and start to transform our lives with. I'm really just going to keep it very simple. The solo episodes are going to be very short, although famous last words, I'm 2 minutes into recording, and it's quite possible that may not be the case. But anyway, this first solo episode is just going to focus on the concept of awareness. If you've seen the little tagline for the podcast, it goes deconstruct ego, integrate the shadow, and then learn to manifest real life, or to trust life, actually, which is what it should say. This is a process that I've learned to help people understand and walk, although it often goes in spirals, in my coaching practice. Ultimately, that process of deconstruct the ego, integrate the shadow, and learn to trust life is the process of awareness, acceptance, and action. If you're listening to this podcast and you're into the kind of things that I talk about, and you're on this journey of going from unreal to real, or going deeper into realness, because of course we're all real at all times, then you probably are on some kind of a transformational journey. The main thing that kickstarts these transformational journeys is awareness. All transformational journeys start with awareness. And so the first three of these solo episodes are basically just going to focus on these three steps: awareness, acceptance, and action. Awareness just means that we start to ask ourselves different questions. We start to become aware of the ways that we're holding ourselves back, the ways that we're identifying in ways that don't serve us, the ways that we have become attached to the fragments of ourselves that are just a response to some trauma or some shame or some guilt that we've been carrying our whole lives, since childhood at least, that has caused us to perceive ourselves, the world, and reality in ways that are not actually factually accurate. In other words, we've picked up something as we've been through life that's helped us to survive, the ego, but it actually is just a big misperception. It's causing us to misperceive everything ultimately, and it's putting a veil between ourselves and life that is causing us to filter our experience through all of the fears and doubts and so on and so forth that we've been carrying based on wherever it is that we've been. And so the awareness stage in this transformational journey of going from fragmentation to wholeness, or from unreal to real, it's just about understanding our relationship with ourselves and how this filter is holding us back and causing us to hesitate and to not live the life that we really want to be living. I've said this so many times on the podcast already, in the interview podcasts, but ultimately, the journey of the average human being from childhood to adulthood ultimately goes like this. And I'll just give the abridged version, but it basically goes: we're born whole, connected to life, free, spontaneous. We basically don't have any of the mental chatter that plagues us as adults, causing us to hold back from what we really want. That means that we're just connected to life. The gap between the inner world and the outer world is minimal. But what normally happens, usually in the first 7 years of our lives, and then is kind of exacerbated up until about age 12 or 13, let's say, is something in the outside world causes us to become ashamed of who we really are, or to become ashamed of certain parts of ourselves that are very real. Let's take a simple example. Maybe you're an artistic child and you're painting pictures or whatever it is, you're like writing stories and things like this. Whatever it is, you do some kind of creative thing, and some authority figure in your life that you care about, usually one of your parents, but it could be a teacher or literally anybody that you look up to, they see your creations and they tell you that it's no good. They tell you that, don't give up the day job. It's kind of crappy. Basically they just make you feel bad about whatever it is that you've created and expressed. And you send that part of yourself as a result into hiding. As soon as that happens, you've basically cut off a very important life stream within you that needs to be expressed for you to be who you are. Once you have split yourself in that manner, and it's not just about creativity, I'm just using that as an example. It could be anything. It can be your emotions like anger or joy or love, good things and bad things. Whatever it is, as soon as you've cut that off, you have to create a version of yourself that is fragmented and that can allow you to exist without actually owning that part because you're ashamed of it. Once you've done that, you've created the ego. The ego is just the fragmented version of yourself that you've created to survive. As you get older, in most cases, you forget that that is what you've done. And in many cases, it's not even about remembering because it's just like an unconscious process that we go through. But you forget, for want of a better word, that you put on this mask of the ego. You start to think that the fragmented mask that you are wearing is actually who you are. And that mask is ultimately just a false image or a bunch of concepts and interpretations about yourself that you've picked up and you use to survive and maneuver through the world so that you don't have to feel that shame again. You've ultimately become shame-driven. Most people who are caught up in the ego, and obviously the more extreme emotional stuff going on beneath the surface, the more extreme their attachment is. But most people that are caught up in the ego are driven by shame. That is the glue that holds it together. Once you've put yourself in that situation and you're identifying as the filter between you and life, then you're always going to feel this kind of restlessness or this itch that needs to be scratched, which is ultimately the call back to awareness. Awareness, as we said, is the first step to healing this inner split. And the reason it's the first step is because the split is actually just a disconnection from the truth. And awareness just means, ultimately, if you think about it, that you're going to be returning to the truth about yourself, the truth about life, the truth about the world and the other people in it. It all comes down to being able to discern the difference between the real and the unreal. And in the simplest possible terms, if you're on a transformational journey, you're trying to change your life, you feel that you're stuck, you feel that you're hitting a brick wall, you're banging your head against the wall, whatever it is, you keep moving forward, but you're not getting the results that you want, then what it basically means in 99% of cases is that you're filtering everything through the mask. You're dealing with the symptoms, not the fundamental problem, which is the disconnection from your real self. And you need to start raising awareness about how you are filtering life instead of experiencing life. It always comes down to the ego stuff. If you can understand where that filter is showing up and how it is causing you to misperceive life itself, then you can start to free yourself and you can move down the other levels of this pathway of awareness, acceptance, and action, deconstruct the ego, integrate the shadow, and trust life, and you can start to live a life that you really want to live. If you skip ahead and you don't raise awareness and acceptance and just start taking action, then the actions that you do take are not going to get you anywhere because they're just going to be an extension of the filter of the ego. This is why, to sound like a broken record, the first step is always, always, always raising awareness of how you're holding yourself back with your identity. Identity, ego, is always the main problem. It's the story that you're telling yourself that keeps you in this fragmented state. And as long as you're telling yourself a story that keeps you in this fragmented state, then you're always going to feel like there's more to life. And that's because there is more to life. All of the parts of yourself that you've disowned, the life that you really could be living if you weren't holding yourself back in this way. So the ultimate question, of course, becomes, how do we start to raise this kind of awareness so that we can kind of crack open this fragmented relationship with ourselves that's showing up as this false identity of the ego, this unreal way of being? How do we crack that open so we can see the gap between what's actually just an idea or an image of ourselves that we picked up and what's actually real? In the simplest possible terms, the answer to that question is that it always comes down to the difference between wholeness or fragmentation. All of this stuff that I talk about is basically about that. If you're at the start of these transformational journeys and you've got that itch that needs to be scratched, you feel like there's more to life, you live in a life of quiet desperation and all that kind of stuff, then the only cause of that is that you are fragmented within yourself. That fragmentation causes you to be to have a fragmentary relationship with life. You're not flowing, you're forcing life, you're just a human doing instead of a human being. You're running around like a headless chicken. You don't really get to experience stillness. You feel like your potential is not something that's really been manifest in your life because you don't even know what that is because you've become cut off from it. If you're feeling fragmented in that way, then the solution is to start taking steps towards wholeness from one moment to the next. That means instead of reacting to the things that happen in your life based on the same old patterns of the same old ego and the same old conditioning that you are filtering everything through, you have to learn to step away from that. And instead of reacting to life, you have to respond to life. You can do that by getting an understanding of where you're going, knowing a vision for your life, making sure it's real and not just an extension of this ego filter and all that kind of stuff. But you can also do it by challenging yourself to become a different version of who you've currently become. That might sound a bit weird, like how can you challenge yourself to be a different version of yourself? But ultimately what it means is that you start to create scenarios and situations that are going to take you away from the comfortable familiarity that is causing you to feel like you have that itch that can't be scratched in the first place. There's that famous quote that always gets misattributed to various people. Some people say it's Einstein, some people say it's Sigmund Freud. Insanity is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If that itch that can't be scratched is plaguing you, then you've kind of gone insane because you're just repeating the same old fragmentary scripts again and again and again, hoping that things are going to change one day. And that just means that instead of choosing wholeness, putting yourself on a different path to where you're supposed to be going in accordance with your own nature, you're choosing this unnatural conditioning that is causing you to be fragmented and divided in yourself. And if you keep doing that, well, it's just a case of real in, real out, or in this specific case, unreal in, unreal out, which means that you're putting unreality into your relationship with yourself, and then you get an unreal relationship with life out as a consequence of that. Choosing wholeness instead of fragmentation is about flipping the script. And it just means a bunch of different things that are all linked to the same idea, which is getting you away from the comfortable familiarity of what you already think you know. Fragmentation is really just a bunch of concepts and ideas and perceptions that are causing you to think that life is something other than what it is, causing you to think life is way more limited than it actually is. The reason that it does this is because it's about telling yourself a certain story about who you are, what life is, what the people you share the world with are like, and it's all based on that same filter of the ego. I like to talk about this thing called the veiled veil. The veiled veil is basically just two levels of fragmentation that cause us to misperceive life. The first level is the level of perception. We're in fragmented bodies. We can't do anything about that. That causes us to perceive things in a fragmented way. And that makes us think that life is fragmented in itself, but it's not. We just perceive life to be fragmented because of the way that our perceptual apparatus works, and that makes us feel like the veil that we see is the way that things actually are. On top of that, the perception, the level of perception, the veil of perception, we also have the veil of interpretation. In other words, we don't just perceive things in a fragmented way, we interpret what we perceive based on the filter of the ego that we keep talking about, and all of the things that we've already kind of tried to make sense of in life. And so we perceive things in this fragmented way, but then we add this extra level of making them even more fragmented and just causing our perception to be aligned with the stories that we're already telling ourselves, which are keeping us where we don't want to be if we have that itch that needs to be scratched and we're trying to take ourselves on these transformational journeys. Raising awareness is about breaking free of those patterns that you've become accustomed to, creating a new kind of status quo for yourself by finding your edge. The edge is ultimately the place where all of these ideas and perceptions that you've become identified with and attached to meet reality itself. If you can put yourself in those situations and scenarios, then you're going to get some new insight. Insight is just about the truth sweeping into your life and bringing you a little bit closer to wholeness, because truth and wholeness are the same thing. When you do get insight, it just means the truth has overpowered those old patterns and it's brought you a little bit closer to wholeness instead of fragmentation. How do you do that? Well, because this is going to be a short podcast, there are some very simple things that you can do. So I'm not going to rant and rave about them for too long, but ultimately, one of the most powerful things you can do is to start challenging yourself. Challenging yourself to do something every day that is going to take you a little bit outside of your comfort zone, get you out of your head, and put you in your body. For me, this has been yoga. Yoga and working out, lifting weights, but mainly yoga. Yoga has helped me so much over the years to get out of those old misperceptions and misinterpretations by actually just allowing me to come face to face with reality itself. When I go into a yoga session, or when I first started doing yoga, let's say, I didn't know what I was capable of. I didn't know that I could keep getting up every time I fell down and learn to literally change the connections in my brain and to get a better relationship with my body. I didn't know that by doing yoga and challenging myself, I was going to give myself space to release all kinds of emotional stuff and integrate all kinds of parts of myself that I weren't even aware were there, because I wasn't in my body, I was in my head. The body kind of gets a bad reputation, especially in spiritual kind of communities or whatever. We think, okay, the body is just a physical form, blah, 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 and the physical, it doesn't have any value. But here on planet Earth, as a human being, your body is always connected to the present moment. It's connected to your breath, it's connected to the truth, it's connected to the flow of life. And if you don't have something that challenges you and puts you in your body, then you're just going to end up running around in the hamster wheel in your brain, and you're going to lack awareness. And because you're not present and you're not connected to the truth, you're going to basically create an identity that is locked into and dependent upon that veiled veil of misperception and misinterpretation. It's ultimately like you're in a dream and you create a character for yourself to live as within that dream, and you think that's who you are. Getting out of your head and into your body by challenging yourself is going to crack that dream open and show you what is actually behind the veil, which is the present moment and this natural drive towards wholeness that is always working and pulling us closer to the truth, but that we resist and distort because we're trying to cling to that identity of the ego. So that's a long-winded way of saying challenge yourself. It doesn't have to be yoga. Go for a run, journal, do some creative stuff. All of these things, they get you out of your head and into your body. Even journaling gets you into your body, because you're writing, as simple as that sounds, that's making a connection between the words on the page and the way that your body is moving, and it allows you to actually start making the unconscious conscious. All of this stuff is about removing the filter that stops that natural drive for the unconscious to become conscious. There's a natural drive towards wholeness that is unfolding at all times. Your unconscious mind is always working to pull you back to wholeness, to allow those parts of yourself that you've disowned to resurface. But because we're attached to the ego and the filter, and we lack awareness, and we think that the lack of awareness is who we are, we constantly block that drive. And so if you can learn to challenge yourself daily without judging yourself, then you're going to actually get out of your own way, mentally speaking, and you're going to allow your body, like I keep saying, which is always present and where the unconscious mind is stored, to start moving in the direction that it needs to, which is wholeness. So basically, that's all you need to know in this little episode. The awareness is the first step to these transformational journeys and to getting where you need to be in life. We're going to talk about acceptance in the next solo episode, and then we're going to talk about action. But ultimately, by changing the way that you relate to yourself, by challenging yourself to find that edge and asking yourself different questions or doing anything basically that's going to allow you to get insight, then you can crack things open and start to raise awareness, and you can awaken from that dream of the veiled veil of limited perception and limited interpretation, and you'll see that there is so much more to life than that, and the identity you have created in response to thinking that is the truth is going to dissolve and fade away, because in the awareness or the light of awareness, you'll see that that fragmentation is just something you've picked up that isn't real and that you can let go of. So there's 3 takeaways from this episode that I'm just going to kind of summarize with. The first one is what we've been saying, wholeness versus fragmentation. Ultimately, we can filter our real experience through fragments, and this stops us from experiencing the whole. This leads to all kinds of issues that cause people to have that itch that can't be scratched. They end up forcing life instead of flowing with it. They have a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. They tell them stories that just reinforce all of the things that cause them to react to life instead of respond to it. The natural drive towards wholeness is always calling you back home. And if you can get out of your own way, mentally speaking, then you can allow that drive within yourself to do a lot of the work as the unconscious becomes conscious. If you can challenge yourself and you can find ways to actively do that, then you can speed up your return to that process, so you can start to put yourself back on the real path that you want to be living and you want to be walking. It all starts with awareness. Awareness just means becoming aware of how your identity is locked into the veiled veil of fragmentation and limitation, and how you can actually free yourself from it by simply returning to the truth. Thank you for listening to this first solo episode about awareness. The next step, like I said, is acceptance, integrating the shadow. Then you can go out there, you can trust life, take inspired actions that are going to take you where you want to get to. We'll get onto those in future solo episodes. For the time being, if you want to do some practical stuff to kind of implement what you've listened to in this ramble about awareness, I really want you to just answer a very simple question, or 2 simple questions. The first one is this: how is your identity holding you back? How is your ego causing you to be fragmented and disconnected from life? What story are you telling yourself because of that identity that is causing you to believe that the dream you perceive because of limited perception and limited interpretation, how do you believe that dream is real? And how is that stopping you from getting where you want to be? If anyone wants to talk to me about this stuff, then you can book a call on my website. Just go to olianderson.co.uk/talk. I've got a free guide on my site at the minute that's probably going to pop up if you do go there. It's called Ego, Shadow, Trust. It's about this process, raising awareness, cultivating acceptance, and then taking inspired action through trust. I've also got a longer course, a free course, Personality Transplant. That's a 7-day course. It's quite intense. And it has a 158-page workbook. So you can really dig deep into this awareness, acceptance, action stuff. But yeah, hope this helps you. The first step is always awareness. Go ask yourself some different questions. Challenge yourself in a different way. And you can start changing your life and growing real. Peace.